Okay, well, my guest today really needs no introduction. And as soon as he gives you his introduction, you're going to know exactly who he is. I have been watching this guy and his rise to fame. Can I say fame, Corey? I'm going to say fame because he's been doing some really cool things. Now, I have a background and a history in event planning. And so bringing groups of people together the way that you do to collaborate on books and in speaking, that kind of stuff just, I mean, I got to give you a high five because what you do is professional, it is classy, it is amazing. Now, I reached out to you and said, hey, I really want you to write for our Create the Ripple magazine. And you were gracious enough to do so. And so before I get too far into why I'm just so excited that we kind of finally get to hang out and hold some space together, let's give the listeners your bio, who you are, and then they'll have a bit of a platform for why I am just jazzed to speak to you today.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. That's so gracious. And there's so many kind of directions I could go, but I'll give the super duper short version. Essentially, where I started versus where I am now. Where I started, I was raised by a single mother, small town in Prince Edward Island in Canada. So the smallest province in the country and the smallest town in the smallest province. And so I was raised by a single mother. Financially, we didn't have a ton of money, of course. I graduated high school with a 49+1 in one of my classes, meaning I didn't legally or technically graduate. The teacher gave me the +1. I didn't know the difference between fiction and nonfiction, and I used to be embarrassed to say that when I graduated. And I didn't read my first book until age 27. Wow. So that's kind of the backstory. The forward story.
What I know about you now. This is incredible. Sorry, keep going.
Oh, no, it's all good. Well, and another part of my backstory, which relates to that too, is I was that guy that was terrified of speaking on stages, which is kind of ironic. Like I was in front of, I was great in front of a group of 10 friends, five friends, 2 friends. I got into sales and I was decent in front of, if I had to sell to a room of 5 people, but speaking in front of an audience was just like a no-go. And so I was that guy that, the sweats, turn shades of color, knees buckling. And so it's interesting for me now to look back at that person and kind of be blown away that it's even possible to jump from there to maybe the opposite of that. And so today, and I'm skipping a lot in between, I'm sure we'll cover some of that. Today, what it looks like is my biggest focus is helping other people get on stages, get platforms to share their message. Basically, what I want to do is help people share their message with the world and up-level their influence. And probably a thing that's maybe different about me than some other people is I've interviewed now over 6,500 influencers. Some of those influencers have impacted 100 million people, like Zig Ziglar. And we tell this story on this new member site I'm launching, which is for influencers. At the start, that Ziglar impacted 100 million people, but the guy that impacted Ziglar, his name is PC Merrill, only had to impact one person, which was Ziglar, to indirectly impact 100 million. And so when I talk about helping people become influencers, I'm not saying it has to be that person, that Gary Vee or Tim Ferriss or Lisa Nichols who's impacting the many or the masses. It can be a person that wants to impact just a few people and make a difference in their life. And so I just preface that because most people, when they talk influence, they're saying, I can help you get on stages to reach 1 million people. That's one part of it, but you might not be that person. And I want to help the people that just want to impact the Zig Ziglar, who then impacts the world, or the people that want to be the Zig Ziglar. And so I spend most of my time today, these days, either speaking on stages myself or helping people get more stages. That's kind of a nutshell of what I do.
Well, that's really exciting because becoming an influencer is, a huge goal of mine. I love Zig Ziglar. I was a homeschool kid. I grew up in a homeschool community, so it was really, really small. Probably not as small as yours, but it's small. And came to Edmonton with big plans. Actually, to be honest, to travel the world, I wanted to be a midwife because I wanted to help people. Life had different plans for me. And I got into working for the government, and then I got into sales because I was hanging out with salespeople who would make more money with one transaction than I did with 3 months of work. And I was like, wait, what are you doing and why? And how do I get in on this? And that started the journey, a number of years ago. And, now I find myself here, doing a podcast with the magazine. It's interesting that you say create a platform, because that's actually one of the reasons why we started the Create the Ripple, or why I started that, is being an event planner. We could put on amazing events, that had great speakers and incredible people. But if nobody knew about it, then nobody shows up. So it shifted me into marketing and just, taking the courses online, signing up for the programs and learning how to write copy and that sort of thing, because we needed to drive people into events, into starting my own media company, because I was like, wow, there are just so many people who need to know how to communicate online to, now here we are. So I like hearing your story that you were like, I started here, I'm here, and I'm a huge introvert. So I can totally relate to, feeling like very intrigued with your own self when you look and go, look what I'm doing today. But I think maybe part of that was that struggle that got you there. So talk me through the guy who is scared to speak on stage. Where was I hear Zig Ziglar, so obviously there's some mentorship in there somewhere. Tell me how you got like from there to here. Like, what does that look like? I mean, I've been following you for a while. I had no idea that there was this kind of backstory.
Yeah. So if I take just that one story about how I went from the guy that, again, if I talk about getting on stage, just because really that was the switch. Once I started speaking comfortably, and I say comfortably, I use the term loosely because you still get nervous.
Nervous. Yeah.
And I mean, just to give some perspective or context, I'm like probably 3,500 talks in and I still get nervous. And so I don't want to make it seem like, I went from this to mastering it, but to go to where the switch happened, which was the biggest moment, I think, in my sort of world of going down this path, was that I had moved across the country after moving across the country. So I actually moved across the country to Edmonton, where you're at, and spent 7-8 years there in sales, which is kind of interesting. You're mentioning sales. And so I spent a lot of my time in sales. Again, one of the reasons that I really liked that is I went there to work on the oil rigs and thought I was going to retire after a week and never work again. Instead, I got burned with hydrochloric acid after a week and couldn't work on the oil rigs again, or chose not to. And I moved into the city, took a position with a Fortune 500 company, 48th largest company in the world at the time. 177 people applied for the job. It was the tiniest little ad, and they picked me. And there's a whole story there in the sense that I probably shouldn't, I wouldn't have been the person that most people would have hired. I showed up with green dress pants, and then I tried to, because I didn't want to spend money on a suit until I knew I had the job, I wore green sneakers to match and hope they wouldn't see that I was wearing sneakers. And so the general manager said, if you come back, I'd like to bring you back for an interview with the sales manager, but I want you to wear a suit. And I still was like, well, I'm not going to spend money on a suit until I get the job. So I came back the next one with purple dress pants. And this time I had purple dress shoes. I managed to find those for Canadians. I'll tell you, I found them at Value Village.
I was going to say, I know where you got those.
I don't know where that came on. And so, so Value Village, I went and bought the stuff. And it was interesting. What happened was I bought these clothes at Value Village. I went and wore them to the sales manager, and I thought, okay, there's no way he's going to hire me, but what do I got to lose? And so I went there, and he said, at the end of the interview, he said, I'm going to hire you. And I'm like, okay. And I was like kind of shocked. Yeah. And I said, so why me? I said, I wasn't wearing the right stuff. The general manager told me if I came back, I needed to wear the right stuff. And I said, what made you decide on me? And he said, well, I showed up for this job wearing jeans, and my brother brought me in from the oil rigs. And he said, whenever I sat down in front of the sales manager at the time, I said, I'm gonna get a job here. And the sales manager said, why should I hire you? And he said, because I'm gonna take your job. And so the reason that he decided to hire me was because I reminded him of him. The general manager, and I'm gonna circle this back to how the point where things change, but the general manager, when I went and asked him, why did you hire me? He said, because you started a small business newspaper in a small little town in sales, selling and running it yourself. So you're working on straight commission, selling advertising to pay for it. And then you moved across the country. And he said, so I know that if you could do that at 18 years old, and if you now are stuck in this new province and you don't have a lot of money, so you can't really go back with your tail between your legs, you're going to have a better chance of surviving than the people that live here that could just drive back home to their parents. And so, those two things led to me getting a job with a Fortune 500 company, which got me into sales, which helped me get over some of the rejection. Although it was challenging, I battled anxiety and generalized anxiety and hypochondria while I was doing it because of the rejection I wasn't comfortable with after moving from a city with a tiny amount of people to moving to a city with, almost $1 million or working towards $1 million. And here's where it gets related to what we were talking about earlier is I got hired for the job. They gave me business cards and they were blank. And they said, write your name on them. And if you survive more than a month, we'll print your business cards. And so that was my start. So that was a bad sign because I'm like, this is a Fortune 500 company, and that's the level of money they're willing to invest in me. Then they said, we're also not going to do any training other than just training you on the equipment, how to use it. I was selling photocopiers, and they basically said, here's your training. Outside of that, they brought me in a VHS tape. So for those that don't even know what a VHS tape is.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's awesome.
The old school tape where, anyway.
There's some Gen Ys, I'm sure, that'll listen to this and be like, there's a what? And I'm like, I know, I even had to ask them today because I'm a millennial, barely. I was mocking millennials for the longest time. I kid you not. And then someone's like, hint, hint, you're actually one. And I was like, darn. Anyway, then I'm like, what is the generations after that? Like, anyway, carry on. Are you looking for a simple, easy weight management solution? I thought you might be. I know I was. I also wasn't interested in something with a ton of gimmick without any science behind it, which I know a ton of companies have. The company I'm about to share with you actually has 12 of their own clinical studies. And for me, with my science-based background, I needed to know that. I also needed to know the product worked. And so I was introduced to the group that, however, had 125,000 members in it, all supporting amazing stories of weight management, weight loss, hair regrowth. Oh my gosh. Not surprising though, considering the product itself has won numerous awards in and out of the nutraceutical industry, which I think is pretty incredible. Pretty exciting as well is the fact that it's made with their patented technology, 7 international patents on the collagen in this product, made entirely from chicken sternum. Chicken sternum, why? Because it most closely mimics the collagen that our own bodies create. Now, I'm a 36-plus-year-old woman, and so making sure that I'm maintaining and taking care of and trying to reverse the clock so I can age gracefully is super important to me. Making sure I'm taking products that are safe, making sure I'm taking products that are approved, and making sure I'm taking products that I would be happy to share because there's integrity at the top. So this company is a values-based company, which I absolutely love. Not only do I love that, but I love the flavors. This is mango. Mango's my favorite. This is from the Modera company, which you've heard me talk about before. 1 simple spoonful a day. In the morning, I can add it to my coffee if I feel like it. I don't add the mango, I add the vanilla to my coffee, but I can add a simple spoonful to my day. It tastes awesome. It tastes amazing. And it's helping my body to maintain the figure that I've worked to get to. Why not? Now, if you're looking for some weight management, this is going to help curb appetite. It's going to help your body to function as best. And we know that when you do something like that and you make wiser choices, your body says thank you. This is part of an entire system called the Lean Body System. I will make sure to post information for that below, or you're welcome to scan the QR code, which I know is going to be somewhere in the screen if you're watching this on YouTube. If not, head over to modere.ca. That's MODERE, modere.ca, or modere.com, and use code 5579027. Again, 5579027 to save $10 on your next order, regardless of what you put in your cart. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of the listen. Carry on. So VHS tape, they plug the training in.
And so I'll say, for those that don't know for sure VHS tape, rather than me trying to explain it, just Google VHS. And it's for a VCR. That's what you use it in. So Google those 2 things. But they gave me this VHS tape. It was a Zig Ziglar sales training. And so it was, and I mean, this is going back, not 30 years, but like 20, high 20s. Yeah. And to this day, I can still tell you most of what was on that tape. So he told a story about his redheaded wife, how she wanted a house that was, say, 250,000, which sounds small now, but when you go back to like the 70s, it was a fairly elaborate house. He said, I'm willing to spend, say, 250. I'll correct that. I'm willing to spend 200. She wanted 250. And he said, so what she did was she found this house. It was perfect. They had everything they wanted, but it was 50,000 more than he wanted to spend. So what she did is she worked out the numbers down to the hour. And it worked out to an hour like it was like a quarter of a cup of coffee. And she said, you mean to tell me, Mr. Ziegler, you wouldn't buy your wife a quarter of a cup of coffee an hour? to make her happy or something like that. And he said, you want to believe we were living in that house the following month. And so but I never forgot those, and I used those in sales. But here's why that's relevant outside of the sales thing, is that after going through that, I realized I don't want anybody to go through that again. Like, I don't want somebody to go through working for a company that doesn't provide training, and now financially they're losing money, not putting food on the table because they don't know how to sell. So what I did from there is not at the time, but I decided at some point I would love to get into sales training. I'd love to train people and teach people, and maybe do it at a situation where they can pay $30 and come to a workshop, so that even if the company can't afford it or won't pay it, it's a small investment in themselves to come to a public one. And so that really is what I feel was the catalyst for me wanting to go in that direction. But then the story I was getting to earlier in terms of overcoming the fear is I moved back across the country, back to the smaller part of the country. And I took a position with a Global 1000 company in the exact same industry. And I wrote a stage play that I put in a fringe festival. It was kind of out of left field, but I play music. I'm a songwriter. So the art side was there a bit. But I was terrified. I didn't want to be on a stage. I just said, I'm going to write this, and I'm going to hire actors and get them on the stage. And so that's what I did. And I had 5 actors, put it in the Atlantic Fringe Festival. It was a 7-day play, 7-day run. 3rd day in, the main lead actor sprained his ankle trying to get to the place quick. And all of a sudden, he still did it. I mean, credit to him. He still did the role because he was the lead guy. I don't know what we would have done otherwise. But he needed extra time now for costume changes. So the problem was nobody other than the actors know the words in the play other than the writer-director, the guy who doesn't want to be on a stage. And so I had to bite the bullet, write myself parts where I'd come out with my back facing the audience with a wig on, and I was covered in sweat still. Nobody could even see my face other than the actor. And the actor, it was probably making them nervous because I was so nervous. But the play, we got it over with. I asked one of the other actors, how can I get over this stage fright thing? And he said, I don't know if this will answer the question, but he said, I'm going to do a 2-week stand-up comedy workshop at Dalhousie University. Do you want in? And I said, that sounds even worse than speaking. And but I said, you know what, I can go there and learn about writing, though. I want to be a writer. And so I went to the workshop, and week number 3, we filled this local nightclub, and we were told we were going to watch people entertain us, and then we were going to chat about it like in a clinic type thing afterward, or a workshop. And 5 minutes to showtime, we looked at the guy and said, where are these comics that are coming? And he said, oh, didn't I tell you? You guys are the comics. So we found it with 5 minutes notice, no prep time, no nothing. We were supposed to perform that night. 8 walked out the front door. I was one of the 7 who foolishly stayed, only because I went to the bathroom to try to find a window to crawl out, and there was no window in the bathroom. I came back out. People always say, why did you stay? And I had this little vision that I was like an old man sitting at the bar, that same bar, talking to another old man saying, you ever see that comic up there? I was going to do that one night. I wish I would have, and regretting it. And the fear of that regret was worse than the fear of getting on the stage. So I jumped on the stage before we even started the show. I was like, you got to face this fear. You're going to do it. Just go and do it. Go first. And I told the first 2 jokes to dead silence. And sweat's now coming down my face. And finally, the guy that got us into this mess comes over and hits me in the back of the head. He says, you idiot, we haven't even turned the mic on or started the show. What are you doing out here? And so I got the mic turned on, told the same 2 jokes. They bombed again. So I think I'm the only comic I know in history to bomb with the same 2 jokes twice on a stage in less than 10 minutes. And that was the start of it all. I know that was a long story, Candice, but it started there. And basically what happened is I went back the next week because I didn't die on the stage that night. And I went back the week after. And ultimately, I went back and performed 700 shows over 9 years, while at the same time discovering this world of public speaking, selling the local community college on Let Me Teach a Sales course. And then people were trying to book me privately because they couldn't send all their staff to the course. And that's how I started getting speaking engagements. And it kind of started from there. The one thing that happened for me that was such a blessing is I started charging from almost day one, whereas I didn't know that was abnormal. And I would talk to speakers that were 5 years in saying, how are you charging? Like, I'm doing this 5 years and I'm still not charging. And I think it's just because I didn't know anything otherwise. Ignorance is bliss. I just said, well, I need to create value for myself. Otherwise, everybody's going to take advantage of me. Exactly. And I just had this great blessing that companies were going to pay. This was a great part. They were going to pay to send their staff to my session. It was $300 a person. So I'd have companies with 50 people saying, well, can we just bring him in because we can't send all their staff? And the college didn't care. They're like, yeah, you can reach out to him. Anyway, and I'm going, well, they were going to pay $15,000 to send people to me. I can at least charge $1,000, and they're going to think, wow, this guy's, it's a break.
Bonus. Yeah.
Anyway, so that's that. I mean, that was a kind of a
That's so
tangent.
cool.
That's how I got started in speaking, and that really is what opened the door for everything else.
Wow. Well, I got to tell you, Corey, one of my favorite pieces about doing this podcast, and I get people to fill out a questionnaire, and that's so that we have your information to put online. But I never read them because I have way more fun sitting down and being like, let's pretend we're having a cup of coffee, and we'll turn a camera on, and we'll turn a mic on, and we'll share that with the world. That is incredible. I can totally relate to your story. I grew up in a church, so I was on stage. I'm a singer, so I've been singing since I was 6 years old. But you're right, the stage fright never goes away. But it was much easier for me to sing than it was to speak. And then, over time, I got into, sales because, well, I wanted to create income. I wanted to create value. I saw that, it was about people. And you're right. It's you're dealing with that rejection. You deal with that rejection, and the world opens up to you. So this is absolutely incredible. I have such a different view of what you do now, hearing the backstory. That's incredible.
I feel like it also drives why I do it, though.
Yeah.
The fact that I didn't. So this is a big part of now my why now. And COVID, by the way, talking about like the idea of what COVID's done to people, because I've been talking about that a lot lately, about pivoting and stuff. Yeah. And in some ways, the pivot that I was already making happen before it accelerated it. Mm-hmm. And that pivot is kind of the evolution of my why, which now part of that is to create a ripple in influencers' lives. So to help them, because I know that if I can get a person, again, whether they're influencing one or many, that's going to have a much bigger impact than if I'm just trying to impact the person myself. So if I can create a person who ends up ultimately speaking on stages the rest of their life, think of the indirect impact that can have versus me just speaking on one stage. And so COVID kind of pushed that quicker. And so it's funny. Part of why I think I'm so passionate about helping other people get stages and platforms is because I know what it was like when I started out, and I was even terrified to get on a platform or whatever that looks like. But B, 20, I started, this is over 20 years. I'm just hitting 20 years as a paid speaker. And when I go back 20 years, to get media was almost impossible. Mm-hmm. Like it was a different world. I mean, there was only in town, like where I'm based right now, because I moved back home after full circle years later, there was one newspaper. In fact, there's still only one daily newspaper here, but there was one newspaper. There was maybe one or two small independent specialty newspapers or magazines. Mm-hmm. And then there was one local station and channel, and there's one local TV station. But I mean, now, of course, we're global. So, somebody that's next door to me might have a podcast that they can bring me on. And so I can be on that. But 20 years ago, people don't realize it's only 20 years ago that didn't exist. Mm-hmm. So part of also what I want to do is I'm trying to create the platforms I wish would have existed whenever I first started, because 2006 is kind of when Facebook started. And that's when I went on Facebook. Well, just for people that don't know a life before Facebook, I mean, try to imagine what it was like to brand yourself before social media. It was a totally different world. You had to do it. I'm going to say it this way. If you had the budget to do it, or if you were far enough in, you could actually own the market. And that's why we hear a lot of like Tony Robbins, the thought leaders like that are always been kind of the main people. And it's hard to envision another Tony Robbins coming up now. But what I'm getting at is it was easier if you had the resources and the ability and all the other stuff, but it was harder if you didn't. So if you were brand new starting out, it was almost impossible to get any media or any visibility or any exposure. And so now that we have those things, I want to give people what I wish I would have had. So it's funny, that story that you said, you didn't know that side of me, that's probably the side of me that drives everything now still to this day.
Which is really, really cool. I know you had mentioned, in the Facebook post, thank you for the shout out that you did for the magazine, that you'd been able to tell a part of your story that you hadn't told before. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly why we're doing this. I mean, when I ask people to share their story with us or to share their expertise or their advertorial, I said, it's about, we do business with people we know, like, and trust. And there's something about writing that down. And of course, I couple that with this, podcast. I love speaking and I love interviewing and I like drawing that out of people and getting to know them. Because again, when people know the why behind it, game changes, in terms of that. I love to do referrals. It's like something I do without even thinking about. After reading Bob Burg's The Go-Giver shortly after I started my entrepreneurial career, And just that whole concept of, adding value and, the laws of stratospheric success have everything to do with giving first and then asking later. And I shifted my focus at that point from going out to sell myself and going out to, sell other people. And that was like a game changer. All of a sudden, it was more fun to go networking. It was more fun to, go out and talk to people, because I'd end up doing more listening, which as an introvert was like winning. What do you mean? I can ask questions and they'll talk the whole time, and then they're done. They're like, "You were such a lovely conversationalist." And I'm thinking, "You don't know anything about me. You talked the whole time." Oh, I get it. People like to talk about themselves. I got to hang out with greats like Floyd Wickman, right? The gentleman sales guy, right? Just phenomenal. Bob Proctor did a couple of his courses, right? Seen Tony Robbins more than a few times. I'm just fascinated by these men, and of course women, Lisa Nichols, those kinds of people who have really gone out and just, changed that. How cool is that? That, did you ever get to meet Zig Ziglar, or did you just get to listen to the VHS?
So it's interesting story on this side, because if I would have been down the path that I'm on now, if I would have been on that path even 3 years sooner, I think my answer would have been yes. But I got to interview Zig. Now, but here's the interesting part. It was a phone interview, and also part of it was email, and like we had to piece it all together, because his last few years, a lot of people don't know this, but he fell down the stairs and lost his short-term memory. So we did the interview. It was his daughter, Julie, and him doing it at the same time with me. But we had to do it that way because he was winding down his career and everything. And so I didn't get to sit with him, whereas I would have since, like I've sat with his son, Tom, multiple times. But it was just a timing thing that his career was basically winding down at that time. I mean, I got to interview him, probably one of his last interviews he ever did, I would think. And then also, and I haven't shared this before, and I won't go too much detail because it's kind of a private story, but I'll just say, his daughter opened up to me about some stuff about him. And while he was still with us, just her and I on a call, separate from the call we did for the interview. And I wouldn't have had that moment had it not been the situation it was. I mean, that's a cool, and I don't mean that like in a way that it's cool that she was going through that. I just mean like to know that I was a part of that, and she was willing to open up with me about what was going to happen in the future and stuff like that. I would have never had that experience with one of my icon's children.
Right.
Had the situation not worked the way it did. So I feel it's meant to be the way it's meant to be. We went to a Hayos conference, and I'd seen Wayne Dyer live, I think twice before that, but we went to a Hayos conference. My girlfriend and I were maybe 6 months together, and it was in Orlando, and we bought the tickets to see Wayne Dyer. Like there were like 80 speakers, but we want to see Wayne Dyer. He passed away after we bought the tickets. And we talked to a few other people like, well, I wouldn't go to the event then. What's the point of going? And we were more on the side of, we want to be there to celebrate his honor. Obviously, it's going to be a celebration of his life. And we got there, and his children came on the stage, and Louise Hay. And it was the only kind of official send-off they ever gave him. His daughter, Sky, sang the song she sang to him so many times for the last time ever. We wouldn't have had that experience had it not been for the fact that, we went to it, the memorial versus, the event. And so obviously I'd rather Wayne be with us than go to the memorial. But what I mean is such an amazing experience to be among the few people that could experience that. So I feel like the universe puts us on the path where we're meant to be on the path. And I've had the opportunity to interview Wayne's children multiple times since then and talk about that event and how much it meant to them. And so, like I wouldn't have had those experiences sort of behind the curtain had the situations not been the way they were. So I mean, obviously, if somebody still asked me, would you rather had to sit down with Zig Ziglar? Of course. With Wayne Dyer, of course. But I feel like I still got to be in their energy. I still got to experience a little bit of their life.
I think life really is rigged in our favor, right? Like Rumi says. And since I've sort of adopted that mentality, I've just been amazed at, how way leads on to way. And, also I'm like, oh, how'd that happen? That's really cool. And you live in this energy, and I think you do the same. And it's like, it delights me when, to be in that place where I'm like, oh, that was good, universe. That was so good. Like,
yeah, I'll say something that there's a two sides to this, because there's the synchronistic part about it. But when you say this, one of the things that's always intrigued me, and anybody that knows me and follows me knows that I don't say anything maliciously. So when I say this, is not meant to be malicious, but people will often see a photo of me and some influencer or a celebrity that they'd like to meet, and they'll say, "You're so lucky. You're so lucky to meet this person or that person, or you're so lucky to get to meet people like this." And my response for the longest time was always the same. Still sort of my response, but I used to put it there, is that if you only knew how much work went into becoming lucky. Because my feeling on it is, and I don't mean this in a way that they're trying to take away any of the work from it. They don't realize how much went on behind the scenes. But first of all, I don't want them to think it's like I just picked up the phone and called and said, "Hey, can I come and do an interview with you?" But I also want people to realize that it does take action. There was a lot, like, for me to sit down with insert name here, Bob Proctor, the amount of time it took for that interview to happen, and also not even just the amount of time, the amount of people that were connected that said, "Oh, do you want me to connect you with Bob?" And I get to them because somebody else introduced me to them. I mean, it's a big, long journey of synchronistic events that happen to make the interview finally happen with Bob. So when you see the picture, you might think, well, you're so lucky you get to spend time with these people. But I worked for 15 years building that behind the scenes when you weren't seeing me build the pieces to it. And so, when we talk about the universe is definitely working in our favor. And I also, so I'll say, and I think we need to still step in front of it. So people always talk about the law of attraction being a magnet, and that's fine. And that's true to some degree. But if the law of attraction, let's say if the law of attraction opened this door for you, but you don't walk through the door, if you don't take the action to walk through the door, then you're still not going to get the results you want. I'll add in one thing. You'll like this, I think, because you mentioned.
I like it already, dude. This is good. This is so good.
But it's so true. Like if my thing is that if the law of attraction puts a road there for you, but you step to the side of the road and never get on the road, well, nothing's going to happen. But Lisa Nichols summed it up way better than me. She said, because I asked her about The Secret and being in it, and what are your thoughts on it, and did they get anything wrong? And it's a hard question to ask that, but she said, I went out on the road for 2 years after I was in The Secret, explaining to people how to manifest. And she said, just filling in some of the gaps, because it's hard to capture it all in an hour and a half documentary. And that that documentary opened up so many people to spirituality. So I'm not going to say anything negative. But, she said there were still elements people didn't necessarily maybe pick up. And so I asked her about this idea of the not taking action, because in my book, my second last book is called The Book of Why and How. And in that book, I talk about the law of action. It's kind of like the secret behind the secret, because the action part wasn't really in the documentary. It was more about visualizing and doing all this stuff, but it wasn't about what do you actually do to make it work for you. And so I asked Lisa about this, and she said, I explained it like this. If you sit on a couch for a year and have the best vision board that's ever been made in the history of vision boards sitting beside you, and you look at it every day and think really hard every day, but you never get off the couch, at the end of the year, what you're probably going to have, and the only thing you're going to have, is a lump in the couch. And that to me sums it all up. It's like when I say the law of action, for example, years ago, and this example I gave in the book, I wanted to share the bill with a big name thought leader. It was early in my career, and I thought this will really help me if I can. And so I put a list down of 5 people. The first one on the list, or second, I can't remember if he was top or second, was Deepak Chopra. And so I went through the list of the 5 people, and Deepak was the only one that was kind of on tour at the time. But the challenge I had was Deepak never usually shares the bill with other speakers. He usually does like an evening with Deepak. And so it's not often, or he does a corporate thing, but it's just him. And so it's not very often you're going to get that opportunity. But I looked really deep, and I found he was doing one event. Ironically, or maybe not ironically, my girlfriend says, "Is it odd or is it God?"
Yes,
whatever higher power you think.
Yeah.
But I said Deepak was speaking in my backyard, and so I'm like, okay, I'm going to reach out to the organizers. I reached out to them, and she said, "Well, Corey, it's probably late. We closed the call for speaker submissions, and we have all the spots full. But tell me about your thing in case next time around we have an opening." So I told her all about it. Long story short, a speaker canceled last minute. They bring me in. I end up sharing the bill with Deepak. My point of this whole thing, Candice, is that what if I never made the list? What if I never reached out to her? Is the vision board still going to bring her to me? Probably not. She didn't know who I was. She had already closed submissions. So I had to take those actions to make it happen. And by the way, my first TEDx talk was the same thing. I reached out. I was connected to them. It was closed. I made a good pitch. They had an opening come up, one speaker canceled, I get in that spot. And so, and this was a long tangent, but just to say that the law of action is just as important as the law of attraction. And so I believe that we also got to realize we're making our own luck. And at the same time, we also, by doing that, can become a magnet for the good things to come to us.
I think I agree. I mean, one of the reasons why you and I are sharing space is because I reached out to you on Facebook and said, A, will you write in the magazine? And then I said, and it would be super duper honor if you and I could share some space on a podcast. Now, that being said, like I said, I've been following you for a while, and I know some great people who have been involved in your stuff. And so, there's that, you know who and who knows you and all that kind of good stuff. But yeah, I totally agree with you. And action is definitely how you get there. So thank you for filling that in. That's awesome. Hey, it's Candice. I hope you're really enjoying the show. I know I certainly am. I want to give a big shout out to one of the products that I absolutely love using. So this is 36-year-old skin, and I am in love with it. Yes, I am wearing a teeny tiny bit of foundation. I'm wearing a little bit of eyeshadow, but in general, I want to go like really, really close. This is my skin. Phenomenal, right? So I recently started using a product called BioCell. BioCell is liquid collagen. Now, there's a lot of buzz about collagen right now, but you want to find one that mirrors closest the human kind of collagen. I was super impressed with this particular collagen. This is made with only the sternums of chickens. So that's the, the sternum bone of chickens in a place that has already ethically and humanely taken care of these chickens. And so we're basically using a part of the chicken that would normally just disappear and be used for other things. I have not gotten into the collagen world before now, mostly because I know that a lot of the collagens out there, especially the powdered collagen, they have things like cow hooves and pig hooves and noses, and I just wasn't interested in putting that sort of thing in my body. I do try to live a more plant-based lifestyle. This is one of the few products that I allow to have animal in it, but I absolutely love it. I'm also really impressed with the company behind it. They're a values-driven company, and if you know from watching any of my shows, values matter to me. They've got a number of values. One, to be disruptive in the industry, and you know me, I like to be a little bit irreverent and go against the grain once in a while. I also really love that one of their values is humility and compassion, because those are huge and important to me. So if you're looking for a place to spend your money, and no, it's not an arm and a leg, no, it's not an MLM, this is affiliate marketing, which means if you did decide to purchase this product, yes, I would in fact get a small commission, which has nothing to do with your products or your purchase or the price point on the product, to be honest with you. It is simply 10 to 36% for me, depending on how many of this awesome product that I get a chance to move. Also, I'm paid daily, which I think is pretty amazing. So if you're somebody who's looking for some collagen and you just want to be your customer, I have got a $10 code. Drop a link or a comment below, or feel free to message me and I will share with you my link so that you can get $10 off of your first order. If you are somebody who's thinking, hey, I would like to get some product and also like to break into the affiliate game, that's a passion for me. I love teaching women and men, but mostly women, how to master the affiliate game. Once you learn how to do it with one company, you can do it with anything else. So I hope that you're enjoying the show, and without any further ado, back to the show. That was good. I like, for my listeners, seriously, rewind, listen to that again, because that's definitely one of the nuggets from this particular podcast. Now, and during my show, I like to open it up for my guests if there was something they wanted to share, something that's on their mind, something that's on their heart. And so I'd love to open up the floor for you right now, Corey. If there's something you'd like to leave with my listeners, that would be amazing, and we'd be honored to hear that.
So I'll maybe leave two quick things. One of them, and it goes back to this idea that we started out with about the idea of in sales and being the go-giver with Bob's great book about giving first. Yes. Or giving without expecting to get anything back. And so I wanted to add something here, and I want to just get people thinking about how they approach life and business. And you brought up me writing the article for your magazine, and something when I said I didn't, because this is what you mentioned earlier, I said I hadn't really written some of these elements before. That the article I wrote in large part was about the idea that men deal with mental health and mental health issues and mental illness.
Mhm.
And I've shared parts of that all along, but never sort of in that whole kind of combined piece. Well, here's the thing, that on the surface, on the front end, if we talk just strictly business, that article does nothing for my business or brand. It has nothing to do with my business or brand in the scope of how people would work with me. I
Mhm.
wrote an article for Edmonton Women's Magazine years ago. I don't even think they're still operating, but I wrote an article, basically the lessons I learned being raised by a single mother.
Mhm.
That doesn't help my career at all in any way. Now, when I say that, visibility is visibility, and of course, you know, you're a part of something great, and you get to write, and you're getting to meet other people. There's all kinds of wins there. But what I'm getting at is, I wrote that article for your magazine without thinking of, I need to write an article that's positioning me to get something back. Do I write those kind of articles? Yes, but I'm saying that you need to go out on a limb and say, you know what, I'm just going to give here. And so the Edmonton Women's thing about single mother, that to me was for single mothers. I wrote that from the perspective of, I know you think as a single mother, it's not going to be appreciated, but here's a son who's super close with his mother, and here's all the things she taught him, and it is appreciated. And by the way, it wasn't at the time, just like your son isn't appreciating it now. And so that was my reasoning. The mental health thing, my mother, which I shared in the story, is bipolar. She's very open about it. I, as I mentioned, suffer from anxiety and hypochondria. Now, I use the word suffered, past tense. I mean, there's a whole story, and I think I shared it in there about how I finally overcame it. But my point is that that story in no way, shape, or form is about bringing back-end business to me. So I just want to give people the idea that you really do have to think about, is it enough for me to just do everything to get business back to me? And I think if you put it out there with the idea of, I just want to serve and help people here, it'll come back to you. And this is the crazy part, even more so than if you try to get it to come back to you. A quick add-on story is Jack Canfield, Chicken Soup for the Soul, for those that don't know who Jack is. When they sold that brand, which is another kind of scoop, because a lot of people don't really sold the brand. He shared it to me in interviews, but he doesn't say it often in interviews. Anyway, he got a good sized check. And part of the deal was they were donate, and this was said in an interview, so I'm not sharing public or private stuff, but he said, they always tied tithing or giving back to everything they did. And so he said that was the biggest check at the time he had ever written for charity. And he said it was hard to write that check. He he said, being honest, it was hard to give that much money away. But he said, I knew I had to, first of all, because I promised I would, but secondly, it always comes back. And you don't do it for it to come back. But he said, I know, even if I don't want to, and even if I'm doing it for the right reasons, it'll still come back. And he said, what he said was, you can't outgive yourself. Like, he hasn't been able to do it. He's tried over and over, and the abundance keeps coming back. And so, again, obviously writing an article about mental illness, I'm not trying to bring business back to myself, but even if it's just the energy of giving, some other way, something else will open up. And so I really believe you have to be a go-giver. You know, to take Bob's phrase. And then the shorter second little tip, I said I'd give two. So I never like to promise something and then leave. So I'll just tell you this other tip quickly. It's a thing that I call the surrounding yourself with exercise. And I'm just going to call it that. I have a shorter name, but that's basically the gist of it, that I did at one point in my life. The only time I was starting to dip back into that person that dealt with all that anxiety and hypochondria years before. It only happened once. And this is what I did to change that. So I think it could be a valuable tool for some people. But basically what I did, and there's a great quote, I think it might be Les Brown who said it, or it might be Charlie Tremendous Jones. But the quote is, you are the grand sum total of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so I didn't realize who I was spending my time with, but I was going back into this anxiety funk. And ultimately, what happened was I started looking and saying, okay, well, I'm listening to the right things. So it's not that. I'm attending events. I'm doing all 3 or 4 things that I know I should be doing to bring positive energy into my life. So and I also, there's another quote, I think it's Zig Ziglar said, the only difference between the you of today and the you of 5 years will be the books that you read and the people that you meet. So I knew I was listening to the right stuff. I was reading the right stuff and all that kind of stuff. The area I hadn't looked at closely was, who am I spending my time with? So what I did, and I never knew this was a thing, I just created it. I said, okay, I need to sit down and write down who I'm spending my time with and do a check-in. And so I wrote on a flip chart, like I call it an easel board, a flip chart, the names of like the 20 people, let's say I was spending my time with. And then for each one, I really thought deeply, checked in, are they bringing positive energy to my life or negative? And I put a plus sign beside the positive ones, and I put a negative beside the negative. And then I just rearranged it. So I had the pluses on one side, the negatives on the other. And what I wanted to know was, am I spending my time with more negative or positive people? And ultimately, I would have guessed, because I was reading the right books and doing the right things, that it would have been like maybe, let's say if it was 20, maybe 14 positive, 6 negative. It was more than the exact opposite. It was like 16 negative, 4 positive. And they weren't all like doom and gloom negative, but they were just negative. Like they were like, oh man, it's going to snow today again. I know it is, like that type of negative, where it's still just thinking about the negative. And then some were really doom and gloom. And so looking at that list, I'm like, clearly, there's no way I can be positive every day if I'm starting out at a deficit by who I'm spending my time with. And so I got really deep about, who am I going to remove? Who am I going to reduce time with? Who am I going to add? Who am I going to spend more time with? Mm-hmm. And it was like, so it became an exercise in doing that. And, there's certain people in my life I couldn't remove, and I wouldn't recommend people remove. And there's certain people I reduced the time with. And it's funny, I shared this one time for an ALS talk, and this small little guy, I remember he was like shorter than me, and I'm pretty short. And he was, his business partner was a guy that was like 6 feet. So I always remember the dynamic between the two of them. And he got up, and he was the smaller guy, and he said, I like what Corey said. He said, but I went one step further than him. I found out my mother was the negative person, so I booted her out of my life, and I've never talked to her since. And I was like, whoa, because I said when I was doing the talk, I'm not suggesting you kick your mother out of your life. And then that gave him the setup for that. Mm-hmm. But I'm not saying that you have to kick out certain people. It could just be that you reduce the time. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line, the takeaway here is, you need to be putting in more deposits, which I'll call positive energy, than withdrawals, negative mm-hmm. energy. And so, when you listen to, for example, let's say if it's negative talk news or political news, then you need to figure out what can you do to offset that with positive. So what I'd love for people to do is, if they are struggling with negativity a lot, literally sit down and write that exercise out and say, who am I spending my time with, and what do they bring into my life? And my good friend Tiffany, who is a Jack Canfield train the trainer, has, I guess Jack and I have a similar energy or synergy or something, because I thought that when I said I created this thing, I thought it was my own. And then she goes, oh no, Jack does that same thing. And there's about 10 things that I do, like I talk about going on a news detox, that I find that Jack Canfield does. So if you can't find my stuff, listen to Jack Canfield stuff, because it sounds like we do the same stuff. But that's surrounding yourself with exercise. I know that was a long answer, but I would give that as a takeaway to people is, if you're struggling, check out who you're spending your time with, and or what are you reading, and or what are you bringing in. So make sure you're feeding your mind, body, and soul the right stuff.
That's awesome. And with that, I think that's where we're going to wrap it up for this particular episode. I have absolutely adored spending time with you. It would be not hard at all to spend a couple of hours talking. And I've realized we have studied a lot of the same people, done a lot of the same things, and I definitely am going to be picking your brain for things moving forward. So thank you so much for taking time out to spend some time with me and sharing your wisdom and ideas with my listeners. I appreciate that ever so much. Thank you so much, Corey.
My pleasure. And can I give people a free gift just as we close?
Yeah. Hello. Free gift. Go for it.
Awesome. Okay. So I say that because we've been talking a little bit about my speaking side of things, and we've been talking a bit about influence. So I have this book called The Book of Public Speaking. It's pretty, straightforward. I'm going to change the name soon. So you're getting in now before I change the name. But I'd love to gift it to people, the digital version of it. There's interviews actually in there with Tom Ziglar about all the things Zig Ziglar did that Tom watched. Judy Carter, who wrote the Comedy Bible, which Oprah said was the best book about comedy ever, talking about how you can add more humor. So there's cool interviews, there's quotes by other speakers, and there's some of my teaching. But it's a free book. And I'll tell you this, 2 things. 1, I'm rewriting it soon. 2, the editing wasn't that great in it. And so I need to take it down soon. And 3, I want to change the name to Get Paid to Speak to match our podcast name. So what I'm saying is, go grab it now. You can make fun of a bit of the editing in it. And then also at the same time, you can see stuff that we might edit out of it later. And again, it's at thebookofpublicspeaking.com. So I like to keep things easy. Thebookofpublicspeaking.com.
Well, we will make sure that we've got a link to that somewhere. There'll be a link for that, so people can click on that and check that out. Of course, we'll also have all of your information included so people can find you easily and connect with you. And again, Corey, thank you so much for holding space with me today. I sincerely appreciate it.
My pleasure, my friend. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you.
Awesome. And to my listeners, you know the deal. If you got value out of this, love, share, comment. It's the air high five, and it really goes a long, long way for those of us who are taking time to create content and share it with you. And thank you so much, guys. We will catch you on the flip side.